We're going to talk about summer fall root stress, notably focusing on water and salt management. So both of those can be major ways that our crops are impacted, especially our root strength and our root health. If we have too much or too little water, that can be both those can be major issues, as well as salt buildup. I'm on the California coast, and that's a major issue here as water quality declines, well water quality declines over the summer. Salt buildup occurs in our soils, and we can have a lot of salt buildup. So I'm Dr. Danny Klittich with Redox. I'm the California coastal agronomist. I cover from Ventura County up through the Salinas area and the California coast, a little north of LA to a little south of San Francisco, and stay on the coastal side of the mountains looking at vegetables, strawberries, assorted other berries, as well as orchard crops such as avocados, citrus, mostly lemons, also some oranges and some other boutique citrus. And then there's all kinds of other interesting things that can grow here that you get to look at occasionally. You got some coffee, you got some other interesting oddities that do well here on the California coast. So hopefully can bring some of the experience here from the California coast as well as other regions in the country, and kind of use some examples that are relevant more widely to help explain these issues. So I wanted to start with this picture. And so these are artichokes out in the field. This is up in Salinas. And I really liked this picture to kind of start off the conversation about water and salts. So this, if you can see here on your screen, right in the foreground, the artichokes are in full head production, probably at least 3 weeks ahead of the rest of the field right here in this little section. And so the soil is homogeneous in this section. It's not like we have a different soil type, but what this area has is they spread some compost as well as some other spreadable products like I think they had some gypsum mixed in here as well on this part of the field. And this is where they stacked all the piles in the field before they took the spreader around and spread it in the field. So, and they let it sit there for a while. So all of the good stuff in those products leached out, and this area got a super dose of calcium and soil carbon, and this is what happened. So this is an unaffordable thing to do in most cases, to pack in this much improvement to the soil, but it's a great example of how soil water movement as well as soil carbon can make a huge difference on crop quality. And if you're able to get your artichokes out and cycled 3 weeks faster, that's just that much more time you're going to have on that ground to pull off another crop. So let's jump into it. And so today, the Redox introduction, I want to talk a little about who Redox is. We have some new names on the list here, as well as then obviously jump into roots and soil health and what we can do to improve soil water management. And then we'll talk a little bit about Redox results and the products that we have that can help address some of these issues. So some housekeeping before we get going. If you have a question, there's a Q&A button on your app or on your computer, as well as a chat function. We'll monitor both of those throughout, and you're welcome to type in your questions there. If you're on mobile, you can the Zoom app will let you. I think you can listen to it through your car, or you should be able to leave the app, and it will continue to play the audio. Has been my experience on Zoom. So some nice features there. Yeah. So who is Redox, or what's our purpose? Redox exists to create passion, excitement in growing plants. That's really what this company is formed around. Many of us, I think, got into agriculture because of that excitement that we also have. Sometimes that can get beaten out of us over the years, but we hope we're here to help you maintain that excitement and that interest in growing the best plant, the best crop that we can. Three main values for Redox: passionately authentic, creatively driven, and scientifically knowledgeable. I hope that we strive to represent all three of these in everything that we do, to bring the best valued products and services that we can to the ag marketplace. And then basically, to summarize Redox is a bionutrient company that focuses on sustainable plant nutrition. So today we're going to focus on some of that plant nutrition, really through the lens of soil health and water movement. So this is one of the issues. So this is a picture I took up in Santa Maria a couple years ago. And a common issue, we need to get water in the ground because the crop needs water, but we have soil conditions that don't allow for good water movement into the ground. Therefore, we end up either wasting a lot of water, such as this grower is having to run an extra long set just so they can get water down in the root zone because their percolation is so slow. But in that, they're running most of the water they're applying right out the ditch. So this is an issue that obviously needs to be addressed. Water is not free, and runoff regulations are getting tighter and tighter all the time. So this is definitely an undesirable situation. So soil health is really the overarching topic for today. We're going to talk about soil chemistry for the most part, and I think that's where kind of the discussion mostly falls here for this. But we also, soil biology and plant physiology play a big role in soil health. So we had a nice webinar several months back at this point where we talked about soil biology, and I encourage you to go track that down on our YouTube page if you're interested in soil biology specifically. We had a guest speaker that talked about the role of soluble carbon in the soil and the roles it plays in plant nutrition and things like that. A really informative webinar. So let's jump into soil chemistry today. And the first thing that when we think about soil chemistry and problems that can show up in soil chemistry is imbalance of soil cations. So this can lead to degraded soil colloids and soil structure. So let's dive into that. So soils are made up of sand, silt, and clay, as well as larger particles. In this case, we're calling them gravel, roots, the microbiology, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of air, obviously, in the soil as well. In a well-aerated soil, about half of that soil profile is actually going to be airspace, which then would be filled up with water as we irrigate. There's macropore space and micropore space. The micropore space is where the roots live. The root hairs are living in that film of water in that micropore space. The macropore space is the larger areas that are generally air-filled are air-filled by definition when we're at field capacity. And the micropore space is what holds the majority of our water and is the majority of where our nutrition, water, plant interactions happen. So we can have a lot of issues show up in soils. Some of them we cause ourselves, and some of them can be inherent to the soil, to the native soil type. Compaction can be an obvious one that we try to avoid, and then also dispersion of the soil through chemical processes, and that's what we're going to talk about a decent amount today. When we have these compacted or dispersed soils, we end up with poor water percolation, this puddling that we saw in that previous picture, poor drainage, excessive root stress. Due to that, the root systems will be pretty shallow. They'll be very responsive to root stress and drought stress because that root system will be fairly weak and shallow. It won't be tapping into deeper water availability. So our goal is to build soil aggregates, maintain micropore space and macropore space, have a well flocculated soil, which means that we're going to have soil colloids that are formed, and all of these things will lead to better water movement in the soil, better aeration, better air-water balance, and a healthier root system that will be able to pull up more nutrition, more water, and withstand stress better. So that's our overall goal. Now, calcium plays a critical role in this soil physics. So calcium, because of its unique characteristic and size, and it being a divalent cation, meaning it has two positive charges, it plays a very important role in maintaining soil micropore space as well as maintaining flocculation of those particles. So calcium is really the primary cation that we see in most soils in our soil tests, and as that ratio and presence of calcium to other cations moves around, we see changes in how that soil actually performs. So soil, the clay platelets that are in soil have a net negative charge, and therefore our cations are drawn to them and can be held in the soil very tightly in some cases, and our anions, such as chlorides and sulfates and other things, will generally move through the soil and leach in a well-drained soil that we have good water movement in. So calcium, being that divalent cation, is able to latch on to soil clay particles and form these soil colloids and help maintain that soil structure. Now, this is in, say, comparison to a compacted soil where we have, or a very tight soil where we have magnesium. Magnesium is also a divalent cation, but it has a very different chemical attributes to it, in that it's a smaller cation, and it will actually make these tight, sticky soils. We have a lot of these on the California coast. Some of them can be very, very good to farm, but they are very challenging as well to maintain, because when they dry out, they turn into rock. Very, very hard soils, very heavy clays, and then they can also form pretty nasty crusts on them and things like that. So we'll talk about that and how to deal with that interaction. So the next issue well, for soil imbalances. So the key here, if you have cation imbalances, is generally to add calcium to the soil and make sure that calcium is available, chemically is able to interact in the soil chemistry, and is also plant available to help that plant build strong structure and strong roots. So adequate levels of ionic calcium will lead to improved soil structure and colloid formation. So the next thing that can be an issue in soil chemistry is inadequate soluble carbon. So reduced soluble carbon can lead to degraded soil colloids, soil structure, and reduced soil bioactivity. So soluble carbon in the soil is constantly cycling, and that's being used by the microorganisms in the soil, as well as is having a chemical interaction with the soluble nutrients, and it's having some complexing and chelating going on in the nutrition, and it will release those nutrients and hold them to some extent, and overall feeding the microbiology. That microbiology is then forming soil colloids through the exudates that they produce, and this will improve soil colloid formation and overall the water movement in the soil and the health of that soil. So we want to make sure we have sufficient organic matter, sufficient soluble carbon inputs to maintain a strong but diverse ecosystem in the soil, and that will have a positive feedback loop to our roots with more nutrition availability, as well as a stronger root system will build in that soil. So inadequate soluble carbon, our solution there is to apply soluble carbon. That's short, medium, and long chain carbon compounds that are critical to soil structure formation and soil health, and to make sure that those are getting into the root zone and having these positive impacts that we'd like to see. Nutrient levels and ratios can also be a problem. So when we have inadequate soluble nutrition within the soil profile, this can lead to reduced plant health and plant growth. That's really why we're concentrating on our soil health so much, as we want to make sure that nutrition availability is there for our plant, our crop, to pull up and turn into yield, whether that's fruit or green matter or whatever that might be. A healthy soil provides more nutritional availability, and that will lead to a healthier crop that will, one, grow better, and two, deal with stress better and produce a better bottom line. So conveniently for this one, we just talked about both the ways to do that. We need to have calcium in the system that will help with colloid formation, as well as soluble carbon, which will help with complex and chelating of nutrition, as well as maintain soil structure. And both of those will lead to healthier, stronger root formation. So we can have a lot of ways that we can really set back our soil health. And one of those is salinity. Salinity is a huge challenge here on the coast. As I mentioned before, our water tends to be very high in salt, both sulfates, chlorides, and sodium. In this case, we'll start by talking about sodium. And sodium as an element in the soil can be very a very bad thing to have at high levels. So as we talked about before, calcium builds these flocculated soils that allow for good air and water movement within our soils. Sodium is a monovalent cation, so it has one positive charge. So it actually has the ability to go in, and when it becomes at high levels in the soil, it will disperse that soil. That means it'll break apart those soil colloids, chemically break them apart, and it'll kind of make the soil into a mucky, nasty mess that doesn't really have room for easy movement of water. It doesn't really have room for air, and this will cause a lot of stress on the root system. Those roots need oxygen dissolved in the water to survive, so it needs that oxygen coming in. And if we don't have good water movement, we don't have good air movement, we'll have massive root stress. But in addition, it will pull up more sodium, and sodium can be very stressful on the plants, on the plant physiology and leaves and things like that, as that sodium moves in that plant through mass flow, and can cause issues on the aerial or in the leaves and the other parts of the plant as well. So this goes hand in hand generally with high EC levels. At least that in my area, we see that there are some soils that are just high in sodium by natural conditions, and we've run into those. But in a lot of the cases, as we see our sodium going up, we also see our EC levels going up. So And a high EC level will reduce bioactivity in the soil and will increase plant root stress and decrease its growth. So we want to maintain a low, an acceptable soil EC for the crop we're growing. Different crops have different abilities to deal with EC, and really the key here is to move water, right? So the EC, as it builds up in the soil, is because we are applying water and we don't have enough leaching factor, and there's can be we have irrigation practices where we try to run longer irrigation sets and move water through the soil and things like that to drop that EC and make sure those salts are moving through that root zone. However, if we can't move water, then we can't move salts. So the whole key here is to move salts through the system. So when we have a soil that has a challenge getting water into that micropore space, remember that micropore space is where the root hair actually lives. And if we can't get water to move into that micropore space due to deflocculation of the soil from high sodium or high magnesium, making a very tight soil that water won't penetrate into, or a crusted soil where we can't even get the water down into the water, then we run into these issues where we just can't leach. We don't have the ability to leach because our soil won't allow it. So the solution here is to use surfactant technologies has been what we have found to be the best remedy for this and most consistent across soil types. And so through using soil surfactants, which it's a big market of soil surfactants, but we'll talk about that briefly, and drive that water into that micropore space, allow it physically to move through the micropore space and pull those salts through and move the salts out of that root zone. So basically, if you're not familiar with surfactants break the water surface tension through their molecular structure, and they're able to allow that droplet to get smaller and move through smaller areas. And as that water moves, it will pull oxygen and nutrition into that micropore space. And then the key, however, is we don't want to just rely on the surfactant to move the water. We want to build that soil so that it will, in the long term, be a more healthy soil that produces a stronger crop for us and moves in a positive direction. So not only do we want to push the water into the micropore space, we also want to make sure that we change the physical structure of that soil through calcium and soluble carbon, and generally pushing that soil health in a positive direction. So the surfactant is just the catalyst to make sure we're able to do that. So so the answer to both salinity and EC tends to be the use of soil surfactants. And then in salinity's case, we also would like to include some calcium to help displace that sodium and make sure that sodium moves through the soil. So overall, our goal here is to produce a well-aggregated soil that has good macropore and micropore space, has a nice chemical balance, I guess you would say, has good ion ratios, that produce a well-flocculated soil, and all of this leading back to good water movement and a healthy, strong root system that is able to pick up nutrition and water and grow a strong crop. So let's move forward here. So we have 3 products I wanted to highlight that address these key areas of water movement and soil health. So we have Mainstay Calcium, Pentacal, as well as H85. So I'm gonna briefly go through these 3 different products and talk about them, and then we'll talk about some examples in the field where we found fits for these and had very nice crop responses in turn. So starting with Pentacal, Pentacal improves water penetration. It's a soil surfactant based product that improves micropore structure through its 10% calcium content. It's a liquid product, improves water movement throughout the soil profile, and improves air-water relationships by allowing water to move through the soil better through its surfactant, and also bring along that 10% calcium along with it. We'll talk next about our Mainstay products, but briefly, the calcium that's in this product is complex through our a surfactant technology that allows that calcium to be highly available for the plant to take up and use nutritionally, but also for it to be available to help build soil structure over time. So this has been we'll talk more about kind of some timings and placements for Pentacal and how it's used. Mainstay Calcium helps build soil structure. It's a 20% calcium product. increases soil flocculation, water movement, and root growth. Also provides a very highly available plant available calcium product. It's, like I just mentioned, it is complex through our proprietary surfactant technology that we react. This starts out as calcium carbonate as lime. We react it with the surfactant technology, react off the majority of the carbonate, and end up with a highly available calcium input where the use rates are fairly low, but we see very high crop response. We're very excited to have, over the last year and a half, we have Mainstay Calcium Organic is now available on the market, that we have an organic formulation of this Mainstay Calcium product, and we've seen great results with that, and we'll talk about that in a redox result here in just a little bit. The last product I wanted to mention was H85. This is the conventional formulation. We have 15% potassium as well as 42% humic acid, and an additional 40 or so percent of other soluble carbon that comes in the forms of fulvic acid, as well as a larger, longer chain carbon that helps to build soil structure and soil microbiology. Helps increase diversity of that biology. It really can help with nitrogen efficiency, and then it's soluble across a broad range of pHs, so it's very effective in blending as well as in different soil types. We have an organic version of this product available. This analysis reverted back to the wrong one because we got a problem with our slide deck. But so it's actually 18% potassium and 50% humic for the organic. It can be very nice. If you're more interested in humic acids, I didn't want to talk too much about them because we really talked a lot in our soil health webinar about H85, how it works, what its function is in the soil. I didn't want to repeat all of that. So if you're interested in soluble carbon, changing soil organic matter, really pushing nutrient availability, I really encourage you to go check out that webinar on soil health on our YouTube page under Redox Bionutrients. So here's a classic kind of water movement issue. So this is strawberries and oxnard. Mid to late season in strawberries, you can see they turned on the water here, and you can start to see these puddles are forming in the furrow. And so what this is showing is that there's 2 lines of drip tape here underneath the plastic, and the water, instead of kind of evenly hydrating the bed, you're getting these pockets of hydration around the dripper. So you're not getting good lateral movement of the water away from the dripper. And a lot of it is just going down some of the cracks that are in the soil and ending up in the furrows. So this isn't very useful. If we're running ag chem products through here, we're wasting a lot of it that's not sticking around in the root zone. And these roots are not going to be in this dried out shoulder of the bed. So really we'd really like the goal being even hydration of the root zone, so that we can have maximum availability of fertility products as they're run through the water, as well as a well hydrated root zone is going to have a healthier soil. So if you check out in the chat box, Sam just posted a link to the soil health webinar if you're interested to pick that up for later. Thank you, Sam. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what we can do to fix this issue and try and have that more even bed hydration. So we'll talk about, so gypsum is a product that's been on the market for centuries, I guess I'll say. It can be, and it has been used traditionally. Gypsum has been synonymous. Pour water movement equals let's apply gypsum. So that's been the tactic in the past historically, and it works to some extent, I guess, and that's why it's been present in the marketplace for so long. But there's some areas where gypsum cannot work, especially here in California, where we have generally very poor water quality. Gypsum tends to not work at all. But also there's some high limitations on gypsum due to its low solubility. So let's talk about some comparisons here. So poor water penetration is a key limiting factor for many crops. We've been discussing that for the past 20 minutes. This trial was done by Redox R&D and some cooperating growers across several different sites. I believe it was 15 different sites across the San Joaquin Valley, looking at evaluating Penical on water penetration and just looking at water penetration. So we started with the first irrigation. We made our first application, then repeated following that every 45 days. So let's look at what that looked like. So our treatment protocol was, and this is pretty standard, So our first application of Pentacal, we make a half-gallon application, and then we follow that about every 45 days with a quart throughout the irrigation cycle or the irrigation season. So in this case, it would have started, early spring, and then we would have had 2 applications over summer, a month and a half apart. And now this was compared to a standard gypsum program that was 3 mill equivalents per liter that was applied at a constant rate throughout each irrigation, for a total of around 1,500 pounds applied per acre over that season. So that was our comparison. This was an aggressive gypsum program and so that was what was recommended for that water type. So we made this comparison. Evaluation was done with a penetrometer, looking at penetration force at 2-inch intervals to 18 inches. And so here's the brass tacks of what we found. So this is PSI, pounds per square inch, on the y-axis, and then depth on the x-axis. The blue line here is at 300 PSI. That is what UC tells us roots don't like to go in soils above 300 PSI. That means in this case, we have a dry soil. We also have a hard soil, okay? So you can see it. So we have the red bar is gypsum and the orange bar is the Pentacal treatment. This is an average. This represents an average across those different sites. So you can see that we have the gypsum program really was only able to allow for water penetration down to about 4 inches, whereas the Pentacal, we saw even hydration all the way down past 18 inches, which was very promising. This is a common issue in a lot of areas, especially in the Central Valley, California, where we end up with this hard pan or some type of chemical, we call it maybe a chemical hard pan, that won't allow water penetration past this kind of 4 to 6 inches. We see this a lot on drip systems in the Central Valley. And we've seen Pentacal has just been a great tool and to run and break through this issue and get even water penetration and prevent that puddling in the field that is just allowing for wasting water for evaporation and it's not going down into our root zone. So one of the best facets of this, besides it actually worked to do what it was supposed to do, was the cost was significantly cheaper than the traditional program. This was just product cost, so gypsum product cost versus Pentacal product cost. You can see a pretty sizable difference, and Pentacal was just injected through a standard fertilizer injection system into this drip systems, and so the overhead and the equipment cost was also significantly less over a gypsum dosing system. So we're pretty happy with this, and we've seen Pentacal time and time again be a powerful tool to build water movement and make sure that we can maintain a healthy root system. So that was nice. I really like this picture. So this was taken in Salinas. Still, we use a lot of gypsum on strawberries and caneberries. It's a very common practice. So this was the gypsum for about, I forget what the acreage was, but it was about a month's worth of gypsum that they were gonna apply. And we found, and so the comparison there, that these 7.5 gallons here of Pentacal would equal this amount of gypsum for that period of time. So I don't know about you, but I've thrown around gypsum bags, and it's not something it's not something I go out of my way to go do. And so this is just a lot nicer, more efficient way to deal with soil movement. So application rates, as discussed, a quart to a half gallon to start with. In some cases, we'll go up to a gallon if we have a really extreme or really heavy soil. Some of the heavy clays that we have on the coast, CECs up to in the 50s. Then we'll crank the Pentacal rate up a little higher because we need a little bit more penetration force. You can go extremely low as well. If we have crusting issues for seed line sprays, we'll go down even to a pint or even down in the 8-ounce range. When we have seed line sprays, we're getting very concentrated applications on a seed line. Bed top sprays with herbicide. Chloride leaching is a big deal in strawberries. We'll leach chlorides out a quart to a gallon and a half if we're doing a big leaching application. So there's some situations where we'll go higher. A lot of the times we will pair with mainstay calcium. And on the organic side, we don't have an organic Pentacal on the market quite yet, but we have seen nice efficacy out of mainstay calcium organic, helping to leach salts and increase soil water movement through the calcium content, performing extremely well. This is not accurate. This is not waiting on CDFA approval. This has been approved for about a year now, so that snuck in there. But So available now, I think across most of the country, and has been a very nice addition to the organic portfolio, and allowing us to address salts in a more convenient way than gypsum, as well as a more efficacious way. So we actually did this to some. We actually did use mainstay calcium in a blueberry field recently, this at the beginning of this year, looking at improving soil tilth. And what we did here was we did mainstay calcium application was applied every 2 weeks at a ½ gallon per acre per application for 2 months. So this was done on a soil that was extremely compact, as well as the plants were not performing like they should. So this was done in Cameroon by Holden Research. And what we saw was before and after shots here from 2 different blocks. We had a very compact soil, up over 200 here, and with the addition of the mainstay calcium, we saw a notable drop in that compaction of that soil. This was done with a penetrometer as well. The more impressive thing was crop response. So before, it's kind of hard to see here, before we had really scant canopies, leaf size was very small, and new growth was very showing some features of just general micronutrient issues, as well as not expanding like we'd like. So after we made those applications, that available calcium really made a difference on soil health as well as root structure. We saw a big pop in growth, as well as the bloom that we were expecting to pretty much be a waste this year due to just the crop looked very sad. The bloom set very well. We had extremely good size and one of the best crops they've ever pulled off of these plants. So really turned things around, and it really worked out well. So that was a really nice application for mainstay calcium. We were able to come in, solve a soil problem, as well as provide available calcium to the plant that allows us to produce a stronger crop. We did another webinar several months back on calcium, specifically looking at it in crop quality. Andy Dahl from Washington talked a lot about that, where we have a lot of calcium issues in apples and other crops, and did a great job discussing that. So if you're interested in how calcium plays a role in crop quality and crop physiology, Andy did a good job on that, and you can look that up also on our YouTube page under our live webinars. So so key concepts for today, really to build a healthier soil, we really need to rely on our soil biology to maintain that soil health. As we go through our farming practices, through irrigation and tillage and compaction from tractors and things like that, we can really take a toll on soil biology. And that's really what is driving our ability to have a resilient soil to our farming practices. So maintaining a healthy soil will pay dividends on crop quality and yield over time. This is really achieved through using soluble carbon inputs such as H85. This an example here is our organic bag, but there's also conventional formulation, and can really help to build that soil structure and that soil biology. Going back to this, making sure we can maintain water movement in the soil through utilizing technologies that maximize our bottom line through efficiency, I think is key. So Pennacal, I think, meets that need and can be a very, very good tool for pushing yield just through making our water use more efficient. In California, we have a lot of water restrictions, and we need to make sure that the water that we have gets into the crop and is not particularly wasted through evaporation or inefficiency of other types. And Pennacal has been a great tool to make sure that we maintain a evenly hydrated root zone, as well as push salts out of the root zone and make the best we can out of the irrigation water that we get. Organic mainstay calcium, really a phenomenal tool in the in soil health as well as crop quality, and we've seen that play out very well in strawberries, as well as other crops up and down the coast, as well as other regions. That has just been a very powerful tool for pushing crop quality and soil health. Thank you, Sam, for putting the calcium webinar up in the chat section also. And then, so Redox exists to create passion and excitement about growing plants. I hope I helped fuel that a little bit today, get you some ideas on how to help grow your crop and help your, if you're a consultant, help your clients. If you're a grower, help your plants build a stronger, healthier soil system, and in turn push that yield number beyond expectations. So we have a couple other webinars coming up here. We have next week, if you are interested, we have an almond, zinc, and post-harvest solutions webinar that'll be led by Nick and Pat from Redox, as well as Wes Asai will be on there talking about some of the results that he's had over the years with looking at post-harvest applications and the ability they have to really build carbohydrate storage for next year, and really start focusing on the next year's crop and bud break, and making sure we have a good strong bloom, a good strong set, and starting the year off right. And I think starting the year off right starts right after the harvest. So they'll talk about that at length. Feel free to check that out. That'll be mostly focusing on almonds, but the concepts are true from any perennial fruiting crop. That those post-harvest applications are a very powerful tool. We'll also, a little further down the calendar, we'll be doing a citrus solutions webinar, and that will be a 2-hour event that we'll be putting on August 12th, focusing on citrus stress and the different tools we have to help with that, and really looking at kind of crop physiology. We'll have 2 guest speakers that day. Ben McLean from Florida will be talking about the state of the citrus industry in Florida and their observations on crop physiology and the impacts of stress there, and some breakthroughs they've had looking at calcium as well as just root health in general, and how that has played a big role in maintaining their crop. And then David Holden will also be joining us to talk about biostimulants and the role they've played here in California on in citrus production. So that'll be slanted more towards citrus, and this will be the first of probably 2 or 3 citrus webinar series we'll be rolling out over the next year to kind of address key timings in the U.S. citrus markets. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for your time. I do have CCA hours requested for this. You will get a follow-up email with the sign-in sheet QR code, so you can get your CCA hours if you do need them. So I'll be getting that to you in the next couple days as I get the response back from the CCA folks. And with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions you might have, and really thank you for your time. I know it's a busy time of the season and tried to make this short and to the point. So please let me know what questions you may have. Thank you. So I've got a question here that somebody texted me. They're asking, so on Penical, what would the standard rate be for some strawberries that are starting to show some chloride issues? So generally on strawberries, depending on kind of the soil type, we'll start out with that half-gallon rate of Penical. We might throw in a pound of H85 to go along with that, and that'll be kind of do that as a single application, and run that with like a standard leaching irrigation applied up front to help with that water penetration. And then we'll kind of watch from there and maybe follow up on kind of that 45-day schedule and see where that gets us. In some extreme cases, if we have really high sodium or really high chlorides, we're seeing a lot of tip burn. We'll come in there with maybe more like we'll include some mainstay calcium in that. I know we do that a lot in potatoes, and where we have clods that'll show up, we'll do Penical and mainstay calcium and maybe some H85 to be kind of a clot busting program. Jeff Yoder's had a lot of success with that up in the Washington region for fighting dirt clods. So in potatoes on pivots. So that's been a fun fit. Thanks for that question. Any other questions? No. This one, I got another one here. Sorry, people don't want to use the chat box; they want to text. So another one here says on drip systems, can I plug this into a slow drip application into my watering system so that I just get a little bit all the time? We don't generally do that with Penical. We found that the spot injections on that kind of a monthly schedule has been a better use. We have some people that do that with mainstay calcium, that they'll put it on a metering pump They'll use a ChemPro metering pump and put that in, and just hook it up to a tote and have it slaved to the well and put that in. And that's been effective in a lot of areas that have saltier water or tighter ground where they're fighting crusting. And we've done a lot on vegetables in replace of maybe cat systems or gypsum systems, where they've just wanted to have something on a constant feed basis that goes across the entire cropping system at a very low rate. And so that's been an effective tool for the mainstay calcium. Pentacal is generally being used more in spot treatments, either bed up irrigations or initial applications. So that's been more so where Pentacal has been effective. All right, anybody else? Here's one from Kyle. Was the picture the gypsum and the Pentacal on top, are those considered equal amounts? So that was an equal amount of applied product. Yeah, so that would be, that would be the equal amounts over for that duration of time. I don't remember exactly what it was. I think it was over the month, I guess that's what they were going to put out on that. So it'd be, would that be 14 acres, I guess? So they'd be doing a half gallon of Pentacal across that, and then across that 14 acres, and then, or 15 acres, and then they'd be doing that 2,000 pound pallet of gypsum, or whatever that might have been. I think it was about 2,000. So pretty powerful difference there. Any other questions? All right, well, my phone number's there, and so is my email. If you have any more questions that show up, feel free to reach out to me, and happy to help you with anything that might come up. Hope you can tune in to some of our future presentations, and I really appreciate your time, and hope you have a good rest of your summer, and I hope the yields come off well for you. So have a great afternoon, and thanks for tuning in.